My father's voice sliced through the living room that night like a cold blade. I froze on the staircase, one hand still resting on the wooden railing, my heart seeming to miss a beat. Down below, my grandmother, Jasmine, 76 years old, sat in the old armchair she had loved for years, bending forward slightly, as if someone had just punched her in the chest. But it's my grandson's wedding. Her voice was so soft and shaky that I had to hold my breath to hear it. Exactly. My mother, Elaine Carter, cut in, her lips pressed tight. We don't want you embarrassing us in front of the Bennetts. They are a family of status. Do you understand? My father, Victor Carter, stood there with his arms crossed, his face flushed with anger, but the frightening thing was not his temper. It was the coldness in his eyes. I am building a reputation for this family, he said, each word clipped and sharp. I cannot let everything be ruined just because the image doesn't fit. You will stay home. End of discussion. I saw my grandmother's hand tighten around the edge of her blouse. No arguing, no pleading, no complaints, just a silence so painful it made my chest ache. If you've ever stood in the middle of your own family and felt as though you were watching someone you love being pushed aside, then you will understand exactly how I felt at that moment. Stay with me through this story, because what happened afterward did not just change my family, it changed the way I see love and family forever. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 29 years old, a freelance writer living in the city of Willow Creek. This story began 3 weeks before my brother Daniel Carter's wedding. Daniel was 26, worked in media, and was about to marry Olivia Bennett, the daughter of a well-known family in the town of Ashford Heights. But for you to understand why my parents could say such cruel things to my father's own mother, I need to tell you what our family was really like. My father owned a mid-sized real estate development company in Willow Creek. He loved telling the story of how he had built everything from nothing with his own 2 hands. He loved standing in front of people, lifting a glass, laughing loudly, and saying, "No one gave me anything. I made it all myself." But that was not the whole truth. What very few people knew was that 15 years earlier, when my father was nearly bankrupt after a failed project, it was Grandma Jasmine who mortgaged the little house she had lived in for over 40 years in order to lend him money. The amount was $15,000. For a widowed woman who had once worked as an electronics technician and was now living on a pension and old age benefits, that was everything she had. Everything. But my father was not grateful. He resented her because it wasn't enough. I still remember one afternoon from those years so clearly. I was young, but old enough to understand what a wounded look in someone's eyes meant. My father shouted right in her face, "Only 15,000? Do you even know how much I need to save the company?" Grandma stood in that tiny kitchen, both hands gripping an old dish towel, her eyes lowered. "I'm sorry. That's all I could give." That should have been the kind of sentence that made any son feel ashamed for asking too much. But my father simply turned away, looking disappointed, as though she had betrayed him. From that day on, there was no warmth left between them, only obligation, awkwardness, and contempt hidden beneath a surface of politeness. Grandma Jasmine was the kindest woman I had ever known. She was not the type who talked a lot. She did not know how to make herself stand out in a crowd. She did not dress elegantly. She did not have glamorous stories of success to tell at dinner parties. But she had hands that were always busy for other people. Those hands had fixed old radios for neighbors, mended my clothes when I was little, sliced apples into thin pieces for Daniel when he still liked to be babied, quietly brought a small gift to every birthday, graduation, and Christmas, even when no one seemed to care whether she was there or not. In our family, I was probably the only one who still looked at her as a whole human being, instead of just an old woman living off others. I used to stop by her house after work. Her little 2-bedroom home in Brook Hollow was not worth much in material terms, but it was the warmest place I had ever known. Her kitchen always smelled like cinnamon, hot tea, old wood, and that strange kind of peace I could never find in my parents' big house. She remembered that I liked my tea with less sugar. She remembered that I used to hate winter because it made me sad. She remembered where my very first published article had appeared. She even remembered the day I had my heart broken at 24 and sat at her kitchen table holding a mug of tea for 3 hours without saying a word. She never pressed me with questions. She was simply there. And sometimes, in this world, what saves a person is not advice. It is someone willing to sit beside them long enough that the pain no longer feels quite so frightening. Gentle call to action 1 after about 3 minutes. If you, too, have ever had a grandmother, a mother, or a loved one who loved quietly and never asked to be recognized, take a moment to think of them. And if this story touches your heart, stay until the end, because the rest of it will show you that sometimes we only realize who is holding an entire home together with their heart after they lose their place in it. A week after that conversation on the stairs, I began to notice that my parents did not just want Grandma to stay home on the wedding day. They were slowly erasing her from the family entirely. Formal invitations were sent out to distant relatives, business partners, and family friends of the Bennets, but there was none for her. When she asked softly, "My invitation must have gotten lost, right?" My mother gave a thin smile. "You live in this house. Why would you need your own invitation?" On the surface, it sounded harmless, but I knew it was a knife wrapped in silk. That wedding, in name, was supposed to be a family celebration, but in truth, it was more like a performance of status. 2 weeks before the wedding came Thanksgiving. The whole family gathered at the brand new mansion my parents had bought in Silver Pines. The house was large, beautiful, shining, and perfect in exactly the kind of way that made people gasp as soon as they walked in. The table looked like something out of a magazine. The turkey was golden and glossy. The mashed potatoes were silky smooth. The cranberry sauce sat in crystal bowls. The glasses, tablecloth, and scented candles, everything looked exactly right for class. And then Grandma walked in carrying a homemade apple pie. It was Daniel's favorite kind of pie when he was little. When he was 8 years old, she had once gotten up at 5 in the morning just to bake one for him because he had said, "Yours tastes better than the bakery's." Back then, Daniel used to hug her around the waist and laugh. Now, he barely even looked up. My mother glanced at the pie and said, "Just leave it in the kitchen. We already have enough desserts today." Only one sentence. But I saw Grandma's back seem to bend just a little more. She set the pie down on the counter, very lightly, very slowly, as though if she put it down any harder, her heart might shatter out loud. All through dinner, everyone talked and laughed about the venue, the honeymoon in Seabrook, the Bennett's connections, business opportunities, and important guests. No one asked Grandma if the food was good. No one invited her to tell a story. No one looked toward the far end of the table, where she sat quietly cutting her turkey into tiny pieces like someone afraid of taking up too much space. I could not stand it anymore. "Grandma, are you happy?" She looked up. Her eyes were still as gentle as always. Gentle in a way that broke my heart. "Yes, sweetheart. As long as I see all of you healthy and doing well, I'm happy." People often say that the elderly are too passive, but that is not always true. Sometimes they are not passive at all. Sometimes they simply love so much that they choose silence rather than make the people they love uncomfortable. After dinner, while everyone else went into the living room to watch football, I followed her out to the back porch. The late autumn wind in Willow Creek was bitter cold, and yellow leaves covered the yard. "Grandma, come inside. It's freezing out here." She smiled. "I'm fine. I just wanted to stand here for a little while." I stood beside her. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Daniel is about to start a family. And my granddaughter, when will she start thinking about herself?" I gave a weak little laugh. "I'm still focused on my career." She nodded. Then she said something I would remember forever, like a scar carved into my heart. "Don't live like I did, Emma. Don't spend your whole life just giving and giving until one day you look back and realize all you have left is an old house and memories no one asks about." I turned to look at her. For the first time, what I heard in her voice was not simply exhaustion, it was loneliness that had been settling inside her for far too long. But just then, my mother opened the back door and called out, "Emma, come help me clear the table." I went back inside, and I had no idea that would be the last real conversation I would have with Grandma before the wedding. A week before the wedding, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up some paperwork. The moment I walked in, I heard shouting from the living room. "I've already made my decision. You are not coming to the wedding." My father's voice boomed like thunder. "Victor, please." Grandma's voice cracked. "I'll just sit quietly in a corner. I won't bother anyone." "No." My father bit off each word. "The Bennets have connections everywhere. Jonathan Bennett is a famous lawyer. Eleanor Bennett is a respected university professor. They do not need to see an old woman dressed in worn-out clothes, living off retirement benefits, showing up there. I rushed down the stairs. You can't do this. My father spun around. This is none of your business. She is our family. What do you know about social standing? My mother snapped. We need to make a good impression. A wedding like this cannot have out-of-place images. I turned toward Grandma. She was sitting very straight, both hands on her knees. It was the posture of someone trying to hold on to the last scraps of dignity so she would not break down crying in front of the people who had hurt her. I knelt beside her. If Grandma doesn't get to go, then I'm not going either. She shook her head in alarm. No, sweetheart, you have to go. Daniel is your brother. But Grandma, I'll be fine. People often say the words, I'll be fine, in a light tone. But that day, I heard a sadness in those words, so deep that it frightened me. My father grabbed my arm and pulled me up. Go home, Emma, and don't you dare cause trouble on your brother's wedding day. I left that house with tears burning in my eyes. That night, I called a few friends. Every one of them told me not to make a big scene, that a wedding was not the time to confront your family, that sometimes, if you want peace, you have to stay quiet. But there are kinds of silence that do not protect peace. They only make more room for cruelty to sit right in the middle of the house. At this point, I want to ask you something honestly. If you were in my place, would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you speak up to protect the person who had quietly loved you all along? Put yourself in Emma's place, in Grandma Jasmine's place, and keep listening. Maybe you will find a piece of your own story in this one. The night before the wedding, I drove to Grandma's house in Brook Hollow. The house was dark. I knocked for a long time, but no one answered. Her car was still in the garage, so I figured she had probably gone to bed early. I stood on the porch for a few more minutes, uneasy and restless, then told myself I would stop by again the next morning before going to the venue. The wedding took place at the Grand Marlowe Hotel in downtown Ashford Heights. Everything was breathtakingly luxurious. Crystal chandeliers, fresh flowers covering the grand hall, and a string ensemble playing soft background music. I wore a blush pink bridesmaid dress. My hair was carefully styled, my makeup flawless, but inside I felt completely empty. I called Grandma all morning. No answer. The ceremony went smoothly. Olivia looked beautiful. Daniel was beaming. My parents smiled and charmed the guests. The Bennets seemed pleased. Everything was according to plan, and yet, every time applause filled the room, I kept imagining Grandma somewhere else, eating dinner alone on the day her grandson got married. After the ceremony, the reception began. Champagne kept flowing. Live music filled the air. Laughter and chatter swirled together, as if nothing at all was wrong. My father stood and raised his glass. Today is the happiest day of my son's life. Thank you all for being here, especially the Bennett family, for becoming part of the Carter family. Everyone applauded warmly. But all I could think was, what about Grandma Jasmine? The woman who had sacrificed her home to save this family. The woman who was being erased from this important day, as though she had never existed. And then came a moment that made my blood run cold. My mother set down her glass and suddenly said, "Oh, we still haven't received Grandma Jasmine's wedding gift for Daniel." Daniel frowned. Wedding gift? Of course, my mother said matter-of-factly. Traditionally, grandmothers give a gift. Remember when you graduated? She gave Emma that antique watch. Daniel nodded, as though he had just remembered something he ought to be getting. That's right, she hasn't given me anything yet. I stared at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? She wasn't even allowed to come here, and now you're sitting here talking about her gift? My mother shot me a sharp glance. Emma, don't be dramatic. After the reception, we'll stop by her house and get it. What I felt in my chest was no longer pain. It was disgust. The party ended around 11 that night. As the guests began leaving, my parents, Daniel, Olivia, and I all decided to stop by Grandma's house. I went with them, not because I wanted to, but because a terrible feeling was pressing down on me. The moment we arrived, I knew something was wrong. The house was completely dark. The garage was empty. My father used the spare key to open the door. The lights came on, and all of us froze. The house was empty. No furniture, no photographs, no television, no old armchair. No lace cloth Grandma always kept on the dining table. Not a trace of the warmth that had once belonged to her. Just a few cardboard boxes in the corner of the kitchen, and on the counter, a letter. My father snatched it up and opened it, already sounding annoyed. But the more he read, the paler he became. To my family, he read aloud, his lips stiff. By the time you read this letter, I will already be settled in my new home at Rosehaven Senior Living. My mother covered her mouth. Daniel frowned. Olivia stepped backward, silent. My father kept reading. I have sold this house and most of my belongings. After many months of thought, and with Emma's help, I have arranged my future. Part of the money has been used to cover 3 years of living and care expenses at Rosehaven. The remaining $47,000 has been placed into a senior support fund managed by Emma. What? My mother screamed. My father continued, his voice shaking with anger. I no longer wish to remain a burden or a source of embarrassment in your social circles. In this new place, I am treated like a human being. Emma, thank you for listening to me, respecting my decision, and helping me find a place where I feel I have value again. I closed my eyes, because I knew those words were not meant to wound anyone. They were the words of someone who had been hurt for so long that in the end, all she had strength left for was the truth. My father read the final lines. Please do not try to find me. Attorney Adrian Cole will handle any matters on my behalf if needed. Jasmine Carter. Silence filled that empty kitchen. Then my father slammed the letter down onto the table. She gave the money away to charity? That stubborn old woman has lost her mind. My mother whipped around to face me. Emma, did you know about this? I looked up at her. For the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of being the good daughter. Yes, I knew. You helped her do this? My father roared. I helped her do what she wanted, because it was her money, her life, and for the first time in many years, she got to decide for herself. Daniel went pale. $47,000? That could have been the down payment on my house. I looked at him. For a long time, I once thought the most disappointing moment of my life had been watching my parents crush Grandma's dignity. But no, this was worse. This was the moment I realized that my brother did not care where she was. Whether she was safe, whether she was lonely, he only cared about the money he could no longer touch. Money. I laughed bitterly, my throat tightening. Is that all any of you see? She just left the house she lived in for 40 years. She had to pack up and leave in silence just to protect the last shred of her dignity. And the only thing any of you regret is the money? You don't understand our pressure, my mother began. No. I cut her off. You're the one who doesn't understand what family really is. I turned and looked at each of them. Every word felt as though it were being torn straight out of my chest. Family is not the place where the person with more money gets more respect. It is not the place where old people are hidden away because they aren't polished enough. Family is where someone gets to sit at the table without fearing they are a burden. It is where someone remembers how you like your coffee. It is where an apple pie is placed on the table with love, not shoved into the kitchen like an unwanted object. My mother went silent. I turned to Daniel. Do you know Grandma stayed up all night when you had a fever at 7 years old? Do you know she kept every birthday card you ever drew for her? Do you know she still says apple pie is your favorite, even though you haven't visited her long enough to remember what her kitchen even smells like? Daniel turned his face away. Then I turned to my father. She mortgaged her house for you. How much did she really have in this life? And yet she gave all of it to you. But you were never grateful. You never appreciated her. All you ever saw was what was missing. I could hear my own voice breaking. You didn't lose an inheritance. You lost a human being, a kind woman, a mother, a grandmother, a heart this family never deserved. When I finished, I walked out of that empty house. No one called after me, because there are truths that, once spoken out loud, leave people standing still, not because they did not hear them, but because they have nothing left to say in return. If you still have your parents, your grandparents, or someone in your life quietly living beside you, please do not wait until their house is empty to realize how long you have neglected them. If this story makes your throat tighten, stay with me, because what comes next is not only pain, it is also a very beautiful kind of healing. The next day, I went to Rosehaven Senior Living in the town of Maple Grove. To be honest, whenever I used to hear the words nursing home, I imagined cold hallways, the smell of disinfectant, and sad, empty eyes. But Rosehaven was nothing like that. From the front entrance, there were neatly trimmed flower beds, shining glass doors, and the faint smell of fresh pastries drifting through the lobby. The receptionist, a woman named Mila, smiled warmly when I asked about Grandma Jasmine. "Oh, Grandma Jasmine? She's probably in the common room. Everyone already loves her." I followed Mila down bright sunlit hallways. In one room, a few elderly residents were taking a watercolor class. In another, I could hear piano music drifting through the air. A nurse was bending down to adjust an old man's shawl, speaking to him like a loved one, not a patient. When I stepped into the common room, I saw Grandma. She was sitting at a table playing cards with 3 other residents. Her silver hair was neater. Her eyes were brighter. And what stopped me in my tracks was this. She was smiling, not a polite smile, a real smile, light, relaxed, and so youthful I almost did not recognize her. A young staff member named Noah stood beside the table, teasing her with a grin. "Grandma Jasmine has the best poker face in the whole place. Nobody can tell what card she's holding." She laughed softly. Then she looked up and saw me. "Emma," just one word, but it felt like home. I went to her and wrapped my arms around her. The familiar scent of fabric softener and peppermint tea made my eyes sting with tears. Noah smiled kindly. "Grandma Jasmine talks about you all the time. She says you're the only one who remembers her birthday." I did not know what to say. A little later, I sat down beside her. She looked at me for a long time and asked softly, "Are you angry with me?" I shook my head immediately. "No, I'm just heartbroken that you had to endure so much for so long." She nodded slowly. "I had been thinking about this for months, Emma. Ever since the first time I asked you to come look at Rosehaven with me. You were the only one who didn't tell me I was overreacting. You really listened. I remembered that day. She had called me so hesitantly, asking if I could come with her to see a place. We had spent 3 hours at Rosehaven, meeting the staff, looking at rooms, asking detailed questions about costs, care, and daily activities. Even then, I had seen something in her eyes that looked like hope. She smiled gently as she told me. "This morning, a nurse named Hannah brought me coffee. She remembered that I take 1 spoonful of sugar and a little milk. It was only my 2nd day here, and she already remembered." She went quiet for a moment, then said more softly, "You know, it may have been many years since anyone in the family asked how I take my coffee." I could not say a thing. I only held her hand. She told me that the night before, an elderly woman named Evelyn Moore had asked her about the years she worked at North Star Aviation. Another resident, an old mechanic, had spent nearly 2 hours talking with her about machinery, circuits, and the old days. "The people here ask about my life, Emma. They really ask. They don't look at me like I'm a burden. They look at me like I'm a person." I turned away and wiped my tears. At Rosehaven, she was no longer the embarrassing old woman my parents had been ashamed of. Here, she was Jasmine Carter, a strong widow, a grandmother, a gardener, a woman with a career, memories, skills, and a whole life worth listening to. And for the first time in many years, she was being seen for who she truly was. She went on to talk about the senior support fund she had placed in my care. "I want to help people like me, people who aren't poor enough to be homeless, but lonely enough that no one really calls them home anymore. Maybe the fund can support visiting programs, classes, little things that make elderly people feel useful again." I nodded. "I promise. Every dollar will go where it belongs, and I'll do it with all the respect you deserve." She squeezed my hand gently. "I know. Because you're the only one in this family who never treated love like an investment that had to bring a profit." And I cried. Not from pain this time, but from relief. Because sometimes leaving is not a loss. Sometimes it is the way a person saves the last piece of their dignity. I stayed at Rosehaven that afternoon and attended the concert with her. Music students came to play the piano. About 30 elderly residents sat in soft chairs, all of them looking as excited as children waiting for a gift. I sat beside her. When the first notes began, she closed her eyes. A peaceful smile touched the corner of her lips, and I thought to myself, maybe all her life she had never needed a mansion, status, or applause. What she needed was simple: to be treated kindly, to be invited to sit down, to be listened to until the end of a sentence, to have someone remember how she liked her coffee. and yet my family had taken even those small things away from her for years. A few weeks later, my parents and Daniel, through attorney Adrian Cole, asked to arrange a family meeting. I attended as well, but only to defend her decision. Mr. Cole was a stern man who spoke clearly. He looked straight at my parents and said, "Mrs. Jasmine Carter is fully competent and of sound mind. The sale of her house, the use of the money for her personal care, and the donation to a senior support fund are all entirely lawful. She has asked that her boundaries be respected. If you continue to pressure or harass her, we will pursue legal action." My father exploded. "That is family property." Mr. Cole replied immediately, "No, it is property in Jasmine Carter's name, and it is also her life." The room fell silent. My mother stood up, shaking with anger. "She is my mother-in-law." "With all due respect, ma'am," Mr. Cole said coldly, "that does not give you the right to control the personal decisions of a competent adult." Daniel sat with his head lowered. Then my father turned to me, resentment burning in his eyes. "What did you say to her?" I looked directly at him. "I didn't fill her head with anything. I simply listened. Something you never did for years." The meeting ended without them getting anything they wanted, because for the first time in their lives, they realized Grandma Jasmine was no longer in a place where they could summon her when they pleased and shove her aside when they didn't. She had stepped out of the circle where people only remembered her when they needed sacrifice, babysitting, gifts, or her silence to maintain the appearance of decency. And by now, maybe you see something painfully true as well. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who believe they have the right to do so because they share our blood. If you have ever been overlooked, always expected to give in, to understand, to stay quiet, then please remember this. Leaving the place that hurts you is not selfish. Sometimes it is survival. In the months that followed, my family began paying the price, each in different ways. My father's company fell into serious trouble after another failed deal. This time there was no Grandma Jasmine to mortgage her last home and save him. He had to sell his car, shrink his office, and struggle under a mountain of debt. My mother had to cut back the extravagant lifestyle she had once been so proud of. No more expensive shopping trips, no more flashy lunches with wealthy friends. She began living more quietly, and perhaps for the first time in many years, there was no longer enough noise to drown out her own thoughts. As for Daniel, his marriage lasted barely more than a year. Olivia left when she realized he was not mature, not responsible, and had no idea how to treasure a relationship that could not be measured in benefits. After the divorce, Daniel struggled. Sometime later, after a drunk driving incident, he was required to do community service at a soup kitchen. There, he met many elderly people who had been forgotten by their own families. One old man said to him, "Son, family is not what you can get from them. Family is what you are willing to give them your time, your presence, your love." I was not there to hear it, but later Daniel told me and said it was the first time in his life he had felt truly ashamed. As for me, I poured all my energy into Grandma Jasmine's fund. I wrote more, not only about her, but about the elderly people I met at Rosehaven and other centers, about their loneliness, about dinners where no one asked them anything, about holidays full of lights that somehow felt colder than winter because there was no one sitting beside them with genuine love. Those pieces were shared widely. People wrote to me telling stories about their parents, their grandparents, or themselves growing older in that invisible kind of loneliness. From Grandma's Small Fund, we expanded into programs connecting young volunteers with isolated seniors, supporting art, gardening, music, and community storytelling. Every time a new project started, she was the first person I told. She always listened carefully, her eyes lighting up like a child's. And I realized something. Some people do not grow old because of age. They grow old because, for too long, no one has given them a reason to look forward to tomorrow. Rosehaven gave that back to her. She ate better. She slept better. She had friends. She had things to look forward to. There were concerts, movie nights, gardening hours, and craft classes where she could share her skills. One day, I came to visit and found her teaching a few other residents how to sand wood in the craft room. She smiled, her hands moving quickly, her voice full of life. "You have to be patient with this," she told them. "You can't force wood to become smooth right away. The human heart is the same way. Sometimes it needs a very long time." and a very gentle touch. I stood in the doorway, my nose stinging with tears, because in the old house, no one had ever asked what she could teach them. There, people only asked what she still had left to give. 3 years after that wedding, Daniel came to Rosehaven. He stood outside her door for a long time before he finally found the courage to step inside. In his hands, he carried a homemade apple pie. It was lopsided, a little burnt around the edges, but I knew he had truly tried. "Grandma," his voice trembled, "I'm sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that I finally understand how terrible I was." Grandma looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a wounded one. "Come here, Daniel." He dropped to his knees, wrapped his arms around her, and cried like a child. I turned away and quietly wiped my tears. Forgiveness does not erase what happened, but sometimes it opens a door so that the good still left inside someone can find a way to live again. After Daniel, my parents came. More slowly, more painfully, with far more tears. Their first meeting with Grandma was awkward and heavy with guilt. My mother cried the most. She said that for the first time in her life, she understood that she had confused status with human worth. My father was never good at apologizing. He was stiff, awkward, and broken in his words. But when he bowed his head to his mother and said, "I failed to honor you the way I should have," I knew that was the hardest sentence he had ever spoken. Grandma Jasmine forgave them, not because they deserved it right away, but because she did not want to carry that bitterness with her for the rest of her life. She once told me in Rosehaven's garden, while we were both covered in soil from planting spring bulbs, "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness means refusing to let the wound keep controlling the rest of your life." I had never heard a sentence so gentle and yet so strong. Grandma's fun kept growing. In its first 3 years, we touched the lives of hundreds of elderly people. Some, for the first time in years, received a phone call from someone who simply wanted to hear their story. Some were able to take painting classes, music lessons, or go on small day trips because of the support they received. And some were helped in the simplest way of all, a volunteer stopping by once a week to sit with them, share tea, and eat cake. It may sound small, but for hearts that have grown used to being forgotten, sometimes one person willing to sit beside them is a miracle. One afternoon, while I was helping Grandma plant tulip bulbs in the garden, she smiled as she covered them with soil and said, "These flowers won't bloom for many months, but I'm still planting them because I believe I still have many months ahead of me to wait for them." I looked at her. Her hands were wrinkled. Her hair was silver, but her eyes were bright like sunlight. And for the first time in many years, I was no longer afraid of growing old, because I understood something. What makes old age frightening is not wrinkles. It is not illness. What makes it frightening is when a person is still alive and yet is treated as if they no longer matter. Grandma Jasmine did not give up on her life when she moved to Rosehaven. She simply walked away from a place that no longer knew how to value it. And that was the bravest thing I had ever witnessed. If one day you notice that someone in your family has grown quieter, that they eat less, sit alone more often, smile less sincerely, please do not rush to call them difficult or too sensitive. Maybe they do not need money. Maybe they do not need gifts. Maybe they do not need beautiful words. Maybe they just need to be reminded that they still belong somewhere. And if you are someone who has always had to fight to be loved within your own family, then please remember this. Real love does not ask you to make yourself smaller just to earn a seat at the table. A real family is not only about blood. Family is where someone truly sees you, listens to you, calls your name with respect, and sometimes your real family is not the one you were born into. It is the place where, at last, you are treated like a human being with value.